So previously we've been talking about the relationship between a key insight from MMT, spending, the relationship between spending, productivity, productive capacity and inflation. And previously we expanded on, did our first expansion on productive capacity, what's the components that make up that, what ended up being a figure. And the first expansion we did was population and productivity. And then I mentioned before that you could expand productivity further, and that's what we're going to look at today, the first level expansion of productivity. So when we think of productivity, what's the components or classes of productivity that we can consider to make that up? And there's 4 classes I use, and 2 of them should be familiar to someone from that's used to economics, and there'll be 2 new ones. So the first 2, H for human, and T for tech, is pretty similar to economics, labour and capital. However, I want to stress that when I talk about productivity, I'm talking about like an input versus an output. And in economics, they do especially the measurement of the output in dollars, which I think is a really flawed way of doing things. I think we should be measuring it in a more physics-like way, such that we measure raw inputs, energy, the amount of potable water used, the amount of land used, and hours of human labour, so on and so forth, rather than using dollars, because a dollar is a very, very sort of slippery, like compared to a physics unit where you might use degrees Celsius for their temperature or whatever. Using a dollar as a unit of measurement on anything is, to me, very fraught when there's all sorts of factors that can cause your measurement to slip around. You don't have that with like a meter or a second or a temperature degree that they can just slide around and become a different measurement over time. So that's why I want to emphasise that I don't use economics as traditional dollars for measuring productivity. And that's kind of probably all I need to explain on it so far. I'll talk about it a bit more later. I will say, to try and make it more simple for the public, instead of worrying about, oh, how would you measure it, and go right into the details of energy and stuff like that, for a large part of this presentation and for what we need to know for the world in the future, all we have to understand is relative differences. So if we can, all other things being equal, do any task, and in one time it takes 2 hours of labour, and another way, a less productive way, it takes 4 hours of labour, well, the more productive one is the one you used, isn't it? So is the one you seek. And so we'll come back to that a bit more later on. The other 2 important ones is these 2 we wouldn't have encountered before. So that's the R stands for renewable resources, and NR is non-renewable. And the productivity I want to talk about with these 2 is a productivity which I've come to describe as in-situ productivity. So if you had an oil well, say like an oil source is a good example. So we've got our ground here, and the oil is only a couple meters down, and it's practically coming up under pressure. So your oil's 5 meters down, and it's got pressure and it's squirting up, and that's what it was like in the early days of oil mining, and it's got like not many impurities in it. So that's easy to get. So this would be a high in situ productivity situation for oil. Whereas if we have another situation where you've got to go kilometers down, and then in fact not only just vertical wells, but you have to drill horizontal wells as well, which we can do, and they do. And then the sediments that it's in is not very good, so you have to crack the sediments as well to get the stuff to flow. And then you've got to have pumps in there to bring it up, because it's not under enough pressure to drag it up, so you've got to use a bit of energy to pump it up, and it's like distance we're talking now is a kilometre down, and then when you get it up, it's crappy and it's got all impurities full of sulfur and that sort of stuff, so then you've got to send it off to a factory and they've got to do a heap of processing. So this has a relatively low in situ productivity. And you can do the same sort of thing for like iron ore mines or copper mines. We know that over time, like over time, we'll draw a timeline, and we do a graph of the grade, which is like the richness, or grade they call it, of the ore bodies, and it plots down over time, because the higher the grade of the ore body, the more, for a given amount of dirt you mine out, the more of the good stuff you get back. So, and that's how things are trending at the moment. And similarly, with like a renewable resource or whatever, you might have a fishery that's close to shore, in calm, protected waters, rich in fish, and so that one versus a fishery that's way offshore, rough seas, you've got reefs around it, you've got bad weather in the area, deep down the water, and lots of other like fish that are yuck and no one wants to eat, and you've got to, so every time you go fishing you catch like a lot of those yucky ones, and then you've got to sort out the good ones from the bad ones. So that's the concept of in situ productivity, and I believe that's a very important addition to the whole understanding of productivity. Economics only has these two for the moment, so I want to add those two. And the way that came out is that for myself, I was considering like trying to understand how to explain to people about like what's happening with iron ore mining and copper mining and that sort of stuff, and that's where I work, and why going forward, it's, even though we have improving technology and improving human systems, it's going to be difficult to keep getting the productivity out as good as it is now, because you've got to fight against what's going on with, you tend to use up all the good stuff first, and then you keep getting down the track, what you're left with, you go to the next best stuff, and then the next best stuff, and so on. So that's just kind of a natural evolution of the way we extract resources. So I'm just going to pause that there. We're going to digress for a couple of episodes, and then we're going to come back and combine a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in productivity together to kind of see where we should go with, because remember, productivity was an important thing in achieving wealth. So we're going to keep on this, a lot of this whole video set is about productivity. And so we're going to go and do a few other sort of isolated lessons, and then we're going to come back and combine it all.